5:09 in the morning, Mountain Daylight Time, Saturday, June 13th, 2026. No one is watching Biscuit Basin. The boardwalks here have been roped off for 2 years. But a camera is. And in 30 seconds of footage, the ground north of a pool called Black Diamond tears open. 3 new vents rip through the earth, throwing boiling water and steam into the sky. This is Yellowstone, and what just happened here is only part of the story. 2 months earlier, a separate team of scientists on the other side of the world had just published something that quietly rewrote 30 years of the textbook answer for what powers this entire volcanic system. You're watching Mind-Wired. This is the real story of the ground that just cracked open at Yellowstone, the new scientific answer for what's underneath it, and the real disaster from decades ago that still shapes how we talk about the whole thing. Chapter 1. The machine nobody was watching. At 5:09 and 50 seconds that morning, a research camera at Biscuit Basin recorded something the park's own geologists wouldn't see in person for another day. A dark plume of steam jetted from the ground a few dozen meters north of Black Diamond Pool. Seismic and infrared sensors nearby registered the shock at the same instant. When Yellowstone's park geologists reached the site the next day, they found 3 separate places where the ground had torn open. A northern vent, 61 feet long, filled with water near boiling. A cluster of 5 smaller vents in the middle. A southern fracture 49 feet across, all of it venting water close to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Rock was thrown only a few feet from each vent. By Yellowstone's own standards, this was a small event, smaller than the explosion at this exact same spot 2 years earlier. Nobody was hurt. Nobody could have been. This part of the park had already been closed since 2024, after the last time the ground did this. Michael Poland is the scientist in charge of the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory. His explanation is almost anticlimactic. These are not uncommon events in Yellowstone, Poland said. They probably happen a few times a year somewhere in the park, often completely unobserved. Every now and then, we get one in a place we can actually see. Downstream, the Firehole River ran milky grey for hours, carrying sediment from the new vents. Poland again. The river stayed like that just for a few hours. Then, days later, something new happened. A section of ground between the vents collapsed, and a fresh pool of boiling water opened where solid earth had been. By June 18th, that pool was spouting boiling water 20 to 30 feet into the air in bursts lasting several minutes at a time. A month later, the park installed a permanent camera aimed at the new vents. Yellowstone isn't guessing about what happens here anymore. It's simply watching in real time as the ground keeps changing. Chapter 2. The answer everyone learned was wrong. For decades, the standard explanation for what powers Yellowstone has been the same one taught in almost every classroom. A plume of superheated rock rising in a single column from nearly 1,800 miles down, almost at the boundary between Earth's core and its mantle. A hose of heat running straight up. In April of 2026, a team led by geophysicist Liu Lijun at the Institute of Geology and Geophysics in China published a study that challenges that entire picture. Their finding, Yellowstone may not be sitting on top of a rising plume at all. Instead, a slow horizontal current of hot rock, a kind of mantle wind, is sweeping in sideways, driven by the buried, sinking remains of a tectonic plate that vanished millions of years ago. Picture it this way. Instead of a hose pointed straight up from the core, Yellowstone sits in the path of a slow-moving underground current, heat arriving from the side, not from below. That sideways current pushes against thicker crust to the east and lighter crust to the west, stretching a channel between them that lets magma rise and pool in a broad, shallow zone. Not one deep column, but something closer to a wide, unevenly filled sponge. It means the source feeding Yellowstone's heat may be closer to the surface than scientists assumed for 30 years. It does not mean an eruption is any closer. Those are 2 different questions, and the study answers only the first one. Chapter 3. How big this thing actually is. The ground under Yellowstone has done this before, 3 times, on a scale that makes June's small explosion look like nothing at all. 2.1 million years ago, an eruption now called the Huckleberry Ridge event carved out a caldera in what's now Idaho. 1.3 million years ago, a second, smaller eruption, the Mesa Falls event, did it again nearby. 640,000 years ago, the third eruption, Lava Creek, emptied more than 240 cubic miles of rock and ash and carved out the caldera that tourists drive across today without ever noticing it. That caldera measures 53 miles by 28 miles. It is the largest volcanic caldera in North America, and in places, the magma beneath it sits only a few miles under your feet. That heat is why Yellowstone has more than 10,000 hydrothermal features. Hot springs, mud pots, fumaroles, geysers. More than 500 active geysers, roughly half of every geyser on the planet in one place. A research well drilled at Norris Geyser Basin measured 459 degrees Fahrenheit, just over 1,000 feet down. That's the heat this entire system runs on. The most famous of all of them was named in 1870 by an expedition that camped nearby and noticed one geyser behaving with unusual regularity. They called it Old Faithful. It erupts roughly every 90 minutes, sending 3,000 to 8,000 gallons of water over 100 feet into the air. It isn't the biggest geyser in the park, or even the most regular. It's just the one that made a habit of performing where people were watching. Chapter 4. The Night the Ground Moved. August 17th, 1959, 11:37 at night. A few miles from Yellowstone's western edge, the ground let go. This was not Yellowstone's volcano erupting. It was a fault. A real, ordinary earthquake fault, part of the same forces slowly stretching the American West apart. The distinction matters, and scientists are careful to make it. A magnitude near 7.2 to 7.3. Some older records cite it as high as 7.5, tore through the Hebgen Lake and Red Canyon faults. On the south wall of the Madison River Canyon, the shaking sheared loose an enormous slab of mountainside, an estimated 50 million cubic meters of rock, mud, and debris moving at highway speed. It crossed the canyon floor, climbed partway up the far wall, and dammed the Madison River. The lake it created is still there. They named it Quake Lake. 28 people died that night. 19 of them are still under that slide. They were never recovered. Anita Painter-Thon was 12 years old, camping with her family that night for her own birthday. Her mother was killed. Her father was critically injured. Decades later, she wrote a book naming every one of the 28 victims, one by one. Highway 287, running along the lakeshore, dropped into the water in sections. Fault scarps up to 20 feet high cut straight across the road. And inside the park, the shaking reached Yellowstone's plumbing directly. In the days that followed, 289 hot springs erupted as geysers, 160 of them with no record of ever doing that before. It's real proof of how connected this entire region is beneath the surface. It is not proof that the volcano caused the earthquake. It didn't. The two systems touch. They aren't the same thing. Chapter 5. What scientists are actually watching for. So, after a new crack in the ground and a study that rewrote 30 years of theory, where does that leave things right now? The Yellowstone Volcano Observatory publishes a monthly update. As of this August, 68 earthquakes recorded in the previous month, the largest, a magnitude 3.3. Ground uplift that had been rising since the middle of last year stopped in January and hasn't resumed. The current alert level, normal. The current aviation color code, green. The observatory's own words, no signs of an impending eruption. The system beneath Yellowstone is mostly solid rock, not the giant tank of liquid magma the movies love to imagine. USGS does publish a probability figure, roughly 1 in 730,000 in any given year. But the agency is upfront that this number comes from averaging just 2 gaps between 3 ancient eruptions. In their own words, that's hardly enough data to make a real judgment. You'll sometimes hear that Yellowstone is overdue. That framing doesn't hold up. The gaps between the 3 real eruptions weren't even. Roughly 800,000 years, then 660,000. There was never a schedule to fall behind on. Chapter 6. The real story, not the hypothetical one. Almost every major science channel has made the same video. What would happen if Yellowstone erupted tomorrow? It's a fair question. It's also not what actually happened this year. What actually happened is smaller, stranger, and in some ways more interesting. A real, small, non-threatening explosion caught only by a machine at the exact same time scientists on the other side of the planet were quietly rewriting the answer to how this whole system works underneath. Neither event caused the other. Nobody credible claims that. But both are true, both are recent, and together they're a better story than another hypothetical countdown to doomsday. What stays with me, honestly, isn't the size of the caldera or the scary probability numbers. It's that a camera alone in the dark at 5 in the morning recorded the ground doing something it's done quietly, unwatched, a few times a year for longer than anyone has been counting. And it's that 30 years of the accepted answer for what's underneath it all just changed, quietly, in a journal, months before most people ever heard about it. Somewhere in Wyoming tonight, that same camera is still watching the same stretch of ground. So far, it hasn't needed to show anyone anything else. If the ground moving at Yellowstone got to you, wait until you see what almost happened underneath a different kind of pressure entirely. The story of the astronomers who are certain there's a whole planet out there that no one has ever seen. Subscribe to MindWired for more real science, told straight. Subscribe to MindWired. If any of this messed with your head a little, well, that's exactly the point. And it only happens because people like you keep showing up. And
hit subscribe right now for it. It costs you nothing, and it's the entire reason MindWired keeps making videos like this. Subscribe.